The wind blew us apart so fast that I think she tried to swim back to the sailboat, back to our sailboat, which was probably, I don't know, 1,000 yards or something.
3 days after his wife vanished near Elbow Key, Brian Hooker made a private phone call to explain what really went down that Saturday night. The night Lynette fell off an 8-foot dinghy and simply never came back. During that call, Brian made shocking claims, believing nobody except the man on the other end would ever hear them. He was wrong. That man, fellow sailor Blaine Stevenson, just uploaded the full recording for everyone to hear. Why did he do it? What is actually on there? And why are the Coast Guard and Bahamian police quietly treating it as official evidence? Before we get those answers, a narrative has been built around Blaine Stevenson over this past week, and it is worth dismantling before we go any further. Some loud voices in the comment sections and people who feel very sympathetic toward Brian have painted Stevenson as a guy who exploited a friend during his darkest hour. The picture they paint is tragic. A man who just lost his wife, still trying to process the tragedy, reaching out to a trusted friend, confiding in them the way any of us would. And that friend, instead of keeping it private, hit record and uploaded it to YouTube for views. That is an easy story to believe, but it falls apart when you look closer. Stevenson was no stranger Brian called for sympathy. And Brian was not just some random caller Stevenson recorded to get views. The Stevensons and the Hookers had built a genuine friendship within the boating community. A small group of Americans living full-time on sailboats, traveling from Florida through the islands. They met in late 2023, while anchored near each other in Bradenton, Florida. They ate dinner together often, according to Blaine Stevenson's own accounts. They had sailed the same waters, swapped tips about the same anchorages, and faced the same challenges that come with living a life out on the water. By the time they spoke, they had been close friends for over 2 years. Marn Stevenson, Blaine's wife, had been one of Lynette's closest confidants long enough to receive her most private messages regarding her marriage in 2024. So, when people claim Stevenson exploited a stranger's grief, that narrative is just plain wrong on its face. Stevenson recorded a friend and uploaded it based on a decision he has already explained publicly, and we will explore that decision later in this video. But it was not some vulture act. It was the choice of a man who, as he told national television, no longer believed his friend's story. There is a second part of this narrative worth addressing before the recording itself takes over. Those sympathetic to Brian have argued that any explanation a man gives to a friend right after a tragedy should not be held against him in detail. An account given while someone is reeling, exhausted, sleepless, 3 days into a desperate search for his wife is not something that should be picked apart sentence by sentence. There is a tiny bit of truth in that argument. There is a massive lie here. The audio recording everyone is debating isn't some guy stumbling through the worst moment of his life at all. It is a calm, detailed 40-minute walkthrough where the speaker lists specific place names, distances in yards, and wind speeds in miles per hour, wave heights in feet, the order equipment failed, the exact angle of his drift, and when the police finally reached his anchor. This is not how a man falling apart actually talks. This is how someone sounds when they are building an account. This video is a deep dive into that story, played out moment by moment in Brian's own voice, then compared to the physical evidence to see where the story stops making any sense. Subscribe and hit the bell so the next major update in. This case reaches you the second it breaks, because today is day 18 of the disappearance, and it is far from over. Now to the call. The conversation lasted about 40 minutes. Brian spoke to the Stevensons for that entire time from somewhere in the Bahamas, 3 days into the search for the woman he claimed he had spent the last 12 years sailing with. Based on the account Stevenson says is on that recording, Brian walked friends through the day before the disappearance, the way one sailor describes a journey to another using landmarks, tides, and tiny place names. The day started with their 46-foot sailboat, Soulmate, anchored at the south end of Aunt Pat's Bay, off Elbow Key. From there, Brian and Lynette took their 8-foot hard-bottom dinghy into the channel for a regular Saturday on the water. Brian said their first stop was a spot called Tahiti Beach. He talked about it with the casual vibe of someone who had been there many times. A popular spot that dries out at low tide, where a barge serves up drinks all day on the sandbar. From Tahiti Beach, the couple took that same 8-foot dinghy to a restaurant near Hopetown, the Abaco Inn, a small island village in the Bahamas in the Abaco Keys. The manager at the Abaco Inn told CBS News the business is cooperating with police and will say nothing else. The departure time for the trip back to Soulmate matters more than almost any other detail in this story because everything that follows is built on top of it. Brian claimed they left at around 7:30 p.m. local time. The Royal Bahamas Police Force has confirmed that specific time. The route, as one local charter captain, who later retraced it for Fox News Digital, described, calls for a turn southwest after clearing the harbor across from the Abaco Inn, then a short ride between the western coastline of Elbow Key and the eastern coastline of a smaller island called Lubber's Quarters. That same charter captain estimated the entire trip from the harbor to the anchorage takes only 4 minutes in normal conditions. 4 minutes. That is the length of the boat ride where, according to Brian, every single thing went wrong. Based on Brian's own recorded estimate, the winds that evening were blowing at around 20 miles an hour. The seas, in his view, were running at about 3 feet. The sun was roughly 10 minutes from setting. CBS News meteorologist Andrew Kaka independently checked the conditions in Hopetown for that window, describing them as challenging for boating with sustained winds of 15 to 25 knots, gusts sometimes topping 40 miles per hour, and a few rain showers. Koch also mentioned, though, that those conditions in the shallow waters between the keys would be much calmer than out on the open sea. So the rough conditions Brian told his friends about actually happened. But according to every meteorologist, that water was still manageable for the boat they had. And then, in his own words, his wife went over. The way Brian described the moment Lynette hit the water has stuck with everyone who heard that recording. He never said she fell. He didn't say she slipped either. He told his friends, and I'm quoting him, that she basically just bounced. That was the word. Bounced. She just bounced off the boat in the middle of a little blow, like 20. Not winds that kicked up during a half-mile trip back to the sailboat. He said that about his wife of 25 years falling off an 8-foot boat in 20-mile-per-hour winds and 3-foot seas, just as the sun was starting to set. If you have a theory about that specific word choice, drop it in the comments below right now, before the video continues. Because the words a person chooses under pressure are exactly what investigators always look at later. What Brian claims happened after the bounce has now been reported by CNN, NBC News, and CBS News. News Nation, Newsweek, and the hooker's own local station, WZM-13 in Grand Rapids. The boat key, Brian told his friend, went into the water right with her. It wasn't actually clipped to anything, and it wasn't clipped to anyone. The key went with her because it wasn't secured, and she even had the spare boat key in her dry bag, which also went overboard. Yeah, it was inflated. That spare key, the one meant to be the backup, was inside Lynette's dry bag, and that bag went over the side with her. In just a second, according to him, both of the keys were gone. The engine died, and the small boat was drifting in a wind that he claimed was already pulling them further apart. Lynette's daughter, Carly Alisworth, has challenged that specific detail directly. She told CBS News she doesn't understand why her mother had the key, since Brian was always the one driving the small boat. That meant Brian was the one who was always in charge of that key. To Carly, the fact that her mother had the key when she fell just doesn't make sense. According to Brian, the wind pushed them apart almost the moment she hit. The wind blew us apart so fast that I think she tried to swim back to our sailboat, which was probably, 1,000 yards or something away. He told the Stevensons that. He thought Lynette tried swimming back to the sailboat, Soulmate, which he guessed was about 1,000 yards from where she fell. 1,000 yards is more than half a mile. That's the swim he thinks she attempted in 3-foot seas and 20-mile-per-hour winds, while dressed for dinner. Brian said he started shouting to her into the wind. He claims he yelled out that he had lost an oar. He said he then tossed the anchor out to try and hold his position. I was screaming for her the entire time, and I yelled that I lost an oar. I threw the anchor out to stop the boat, and I just kept yelling. I yelled. Then, on that recording, he said something that sailors around the world have stopped to replay over and over. He said he lost sight of her because, in his words, the moon hadn't come up yet. Jess, yeah, I was yelling. I couldn't see her anymore. It was dark because the moon hadn't risen yet. Keep that sentence in mind. We are going to come back to it later. In the minutes that followed, based on the story Brian told the Stevensons, the rest of the disaster happened piece by piece. Right after Lynette fell, he told his friends he threw a flotation cushion toward her. He claimed he tossed it the second he reached it, but he couldn't tell if it actually got to her, and he had no idea if she even grabbed it. The waves were doing their thing, and, I think I only saw her twice. I tossed her a flotation cushion, one of the ones we used on the dinghy, right after she went overboard. Other reports of the same recording have pushed that detail further, claiming Brian said on the tape she never even got it. Either way, the result was the same. She was out in the water with absolutely nothing to keep her afloat, with 3-foot waves between them and the wind pushing them apart faster than he could close the gap. There is one small, striking detail tied to that cushion. Richard Cook, the head of Hopetown Volunteer Rescue, later confirmed 2 key facts to the local news. The first was that Lynette wasn't wearing a life jacket when she went over the side, a detail Cook went on record with before that cameo recording ever came out. Second, search teams did eventually recover one specific item: the flotation device Brian claimed he threw to his wife while she was in the water. Brian actually left a voicemail for Lynette's own daughter, Carly, telling her they found that cushion. He said the Hopetown rescue team recovered it. So, the cushion is real. It was definitely found. Hopetown Search and Rescue called, and they found the flotation device I threw to Mom when she fell overboard. They haven't found her yet, but now they can focus their search in a much smaller area. By Brian's own account, that cushion was thrown. Lynette never had it. And on the night she disappeared, based on both Cook's confirmation and Brian's own confession, she wasn't wearing anything else that would float. There were 2 flotation devices on that dinghy. Neither one was on her when the wind pulled them apart. Then he told his friends that one of the oar pins snapped. With one oar lost and an engine that wouldn't start, a small dinghy in 20-mile-per-hour winds just won't row straight. It just spins in circles. So Brian said he dropped the anchor. The single sentence he used to describe what that felt like is something he told his friends in one single breath. I was trying to row for shore, and one of the pins on. The oar lock broke and she dropped over the side. I kept yelling for her the whole time. I yelled to her that I'd lost the oar, then I threw the anchor out. He shouted that he'd lost the oar, tossed the anchor, and kept screaming. But he couldn't see her anymore because the moon wasn't up yet. What followed, in his version, was an entire hour of calling out. He said he was yelling for her the whole time. He claimed that after a full hour of calling into the wind, he never heard a single word back. By the time the anchor finally caught, by the time he finally stopped drifting, Brian estimated he was roughly a quarter to half a mile from where his wife fell in. That is the moment, captured on a secret recording by his friend, where Brian Hooker decides he must leave the area to find help. He claimed he couldn't reach the island just by drifting. He said he would have to paddle there instead. This next part of the recording is the most intense portion of the entire 40 minutes. It is also the specific clip most frequently replayed by viewers in the Sailing Cameo channel's comment section. Brian told his friends he paddled. He told them that while paddling, he spotted several other boats passing through the area and tried to signal them. He used the flashlight feature on his smartphone. He fired flares at 2 passing vessels and waved his phone light at a third one. According to him, not one of those boats turned. Nobody saw him out there. In his own words to NBC News, the struggle to paddle lasted 7 hours. During that time, Brian also explained to his friends exactly what his phone was doing throughout the ordeal. He said he had it with him, but it just didn't work. He gave a very specific reason, that the phone only made calls over Wi-Fi, and that out on the open water, no signal was available. That single sentence is his only public explanation Brian Hooker has ever offered as to why he never dialed 911. Why he didn't call the United States Coast Guard or let anyone know his wife was lost in the water for hours. By his own account, he drifted for hours. He claimed he finally washed ashore on marshland that he estimated was roughly 4 miles from where Lynette went overboard near the Marsh Harbor boat yards. He said the police didn't reach him until around 4 a.m. on Sunday morning, April 5th. By the time they arrived, his wife had been missing in the water for roughly 8 hours. Near the middle of that call, Brian summed up the situation in his own words. He told the Stevensons directly that the two of them had done so many things wrong. He grouped those failures into 3 specific categories according to local news: weather, equipment, and navigation. That powerboat came by, and I waved my phone flashlight, but we were moving so fast I barely saw it. You know, I didn't even see it. And another one passed right behind it. Maybe 5 minutes later, and I had grabbed the flares by then. I came with 2 flares, but I guess they just didn't see the signal. He told them a line that has been quoted by almost every major news outlet. Covering the case, he said the whole evening was a tragic cascade of failures, and something he was never going to forgive himself for. He said they stayed too long. He said they left too dark. And inside that same confession, he admitted they had no life jackets. A detail the narrator of this video will walk past once and revisit much later. Brian also told the Stevensons something that, if you listen closely, sounds almost like a confession against himself. He said he threw the anchor out last instead of first. He said he couldn't explain why. He just knew that he hated that boat, and if she didn't come back, he was never stepping on it again. Kind of dropped it. It was a magnet key for the electric motor. It was a cascade of failures, and there is something I am never going to forgive myself for. And then this happened Saturday night. The most crushing part of that recording isn't what people are saying about Brian. It is what Brian, using his own voice, says about himself. That is exactly what filled those 40 minutes on the call. On Wednesday, April 8th, around 7 p.m. local time, police in the Bahamas arrested Brian Hooker in Marsh Harbor, Abaco. That same day, the U.S. Coast Guard announced their own separate criminal investigation. Brian was finally in custody. No more public statements. His lawyer, Terrell Butler, was doing the talking now. Sometime between the arrest and that Friday, April 11th, Blaine Stevenson made a choice that has shaped this entire legal battle. He took the recording he made back on April 7th, that 40-minute call Brian didn't know existed, and uploaded it to his own YouTube channel, known to news outlets like WZZM13 as Sailing Cameo. Once that file went live, every major news outlet from CBS and CNN to News Nation pulled audio from that channel. The story Brian told 2 friends in private was now the version of events the whole world heard. Stevenson has explained why he did it on the record several times. He told CNN he hit record because he wasn't familiar with those Abaco waters and wanted to record the place names Brian mentioned so he could track them on a chart. He told CNN he posted the file because Brian was locked up and couldn't speak. Also, the people searching for Lynette deserved every single detail Brian gave about how and where she ended up in the ocean. He told CNN that the sailing community needed to judge the story for themselves by hearing the details in Brian's own words. Then, he gave News Nation a quote that changes how we see the whole upload. He said plainly that a week from that day, he didn't want Lynette to be found and have it determined that she was alive, but died of exposure instead of anything else. Let that sentence sink in for a moment. Stevenson isn't saying he expects a YouTube video to find Lynette. He is saying he doesn't want her found dead later in a way that public pressure could have stopped. Those are the man's own reasons, straight from his mouth. Brian's defense team did one specific thing about that recording, and you really need to pay attention to it. On April 11th, CNN emailed Terrell Butler asking if that was actually her client's voice on the tape. Butler's reply was simply that she couldn't confirm it. She didn't deny it, but she didn't verify it either. She didn't accept it as evidence and hasn't said a word about that voice since then. When a defense lawyer won't confirm if 40 minutes of audio belongs to her client, she isn't trying to tell you the recording is fake. She's telling you she knows exactly how this looks. Her job isn't to help the prosecution verify evidence they might use against her. Her job is to force someone else to prove it in court, where strict legal rules actually matter. Legally, she's doing the right thing. Visually, it looks terrible. Now let's go back to the moon. On the recording, Brian gave a very specific reason for why he could no longer see his wife. It wasn't because of the wind. It wasn't the waves either. and it wasn't that she simply drifted too far away. He claimed the moon had not come up yet. The issue is that based on Brian's own numbers from that call, the timeline just does not add up. Lynette went overboard at roughly 7:30 p.m. That is local time. Brian says the sun went down about 10 minutes after she vanished. In the Bahamas during early April, a sunset does not immediately bring pitch-black midnight darkness. You get the soft, fading glow of a sun that just slipped under the horizon, leaving the western sky bright for quite a while. There is a specific name for that time of day. Sailors and pilots call it civil twilight. It is the window between sunset and the moment the sun hits 6 degrees below the horizon, when you can still see clearly outside without any lights. In the Bahamas during early April, this civil twilight lasts about 20 to 25 minutes after sunset. So, at 7:40 p.m. on April 4th, when Brian says he was a quarter to half a mile from where Lynette went in, the sky was still light, not bright. It was not high noon, but light enough to spot someone in the water from 1,000 yards. Brian's own distance estimate. A man described by his own friends as a former Marine who told CBS News that he spent over 12 years sailing with his wife surely knows the difference between twilight and a moonless night. One does not start 10 minutes after a 7:30 p.m. sunset. The other does not happen for hours. When Brian told friends the moon had not risen, he described a darkness that the clock simply would not have allowed. This is the first instance where Brian's recorded claims fail to match the reality of what the world outside can prove. There are 3 others. The second contradiction comes from a man named Mo Monesteem. Monesteem is a veteran charter boat captain with 15 years of experience in the waters around Great Abaco Island. Fox News Digital asked him to do something very specific. They wanted him to recreate the exact route Brian and Lynette took on the evening of April 4th as closely as possible. Monesteem agreed. He took a boat from the harbor across from the Abaco Inn, the very same harbor the couple left around 7:30 p.m. He headed southwest, running between the western coast of Elbow Key and the eastern side of Lubber's Quarters. That is the exact stretch of water Brian described to his friends on that sailing video recording. What? Monesteem told Fox News Digital about that area is the kind of detail only an experienced local would know by heart. The water, he explained, is so clear you can see straight to the bottom from the deck of any boat. It can be as shallow as 4 feet at low tide. At high tide, he estimated it hits 10 feet. From 4 feet at low tide to 10 feet at high tide. That is the depth of the water where Brian and Lynette were when, according to Brian, a 20-mile-per-hour wind pushed them 1,000 yards apart and sent his dinghy even further away. Brian's own screenshots from Navionics, shared by CBS News, confirmed those exact water depths. According to his own map, the incident happened in water under 10 feet deep at high tide. Monesteem did not stop at the depth. He shared a longer observation about those waters and what typically happens to a person who goes missing in them. The fact that Lynette still has not been found, he said, was the real mystery. It is very hard. He claims it is hard to vanish when boats are so close to the land. If someone goes over and drowns, you are going to find them the next morning. He explained that he has captained boats through that very channel, spotting turtles and rays in the water right from the deck. He would notice a body. People would say something like, "Hey, we just spotted something weird out in the waves." He added one final point that is worth quoting. Exactly. You can see the land the entire time. That detail hits harder when you realize the Bahamian search has entered its 3rd week. Authorities have used shoreline patrols, sea searches, and aerial drones, submersible drones. And on Thursday, April 16th, the U.S. Coast Guard brought in cadaver dogs. Even so, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force told ABC News in a formal statement that, in their own words, these search efforts have failed to locate the missing person. Brian called it an open water disaster, but experts say a body should be found there. By every local standard, they should have recovered him by now, but they have not. The 3rd place where Brian's story clashes with the real world is his phone. On that recording, Brian told friends his phone was useless because it required Wi-Fi and there was no connection out on the water. On April 11th, Fox News Digital ran an assessment from a tech expert about that claim. The expert, Dmitry Malinsky, is the CEO and founder of a telecom firm called Intrat. Malinsky told Fox News that cell coverage in that 4.5-mile channel is spotty but present in his professional opinion. It is not a total dead zone. It is not zero. Spotty service is a far cry from no service. The bigger point about Brian's phone has nothing to do with what he claims to remember. It is about what the carrier records. Every tower ping and every connection attempt, every Wi-Fi network it searched for. That data is sitting on a server somewhere, whether he ever touched the device or not. Investigators with a warrant can get it. Maybe they already have. Once that data arrives, it will either back up Brian's story or it will not. The U.S. Coast Guard's criminal investigation, launched the night of Brian's arrest, is exactly the type of probe that pulls that digital data. The fourth discrepancy is the strangest because it does not rely on experts at all. It comes from Brian. On the recording, Brian admitted he threw the anchor out last instead of doing it first. He said he could not explain why. He just knew he hated the boat. Think about what that means in the water. When someone falls overboard from a small boat in wind and current, the anchor is the only thing keeping you close. It holds your position. The anchor stops the drift. It keeps you in sight of the person who needs help until you can pull them in or signal a passing boat. Dropping an anchor after the boat has drifted 1,000 yards away. After a pin breaks, once an oar is lost, it means by the time the anchor finally catches ground, you are nowhere near where your wife actually is. You're anchoring where the tide took you, which Brian estimated was 1/4 to half a mile away. That isn't some outside theory. That is Brian's own read on his own story. And the man giving that account is, by his friend's description, a former Marine. There is a second sailor who has questioned that anchor sequence on the record as well. His name is worth knowing because he was Brian's friend, not just a critic. Daniel Danforth, a veteran boater and friend of the Hookers since 2003, appeared on Fox and Friends Weekend. After hearing Brian's story, he said in his own words that it didn't add up. Danforth confirmed Brian and Lynette were, in his words, highly experienced boaters who knew exactly what they were doing. He raised a specific question that has haunted the case ever since then. He asked why Brian, after losing sight of Lynette, did not return to Soulmate to see if she climbed back on. One major concern was, maybe she made it back to the sailboat without a problem. And once he got to land, why didn't he immediately go back to the sailboat to see if she made it? If she did make it to the sailboat, he would expect her to call for help too. By Brian's own account on that recording, he believed that swim was exactly what Lynette was attempting. By his own estimate, the boat was only 1,000 yards from where she went over. So the question Danforth raised on national television is what every experienced boater has asked since. If your wife is swimming toward your sailboat, the sailboat is the first place you go, not 4 miles away, and not to marshes on a different island. The sailboat. Brian did not go back to the sailboat. He paddled in the opposite direction, and the man who knew him for more than 2 decades said on the record that one decision didn't match the friend he knew. Which brings us to the one detail about that night that no expert sailor can explain. To see it, you have to look at every piece of this recording together in one single frame. Consider the account Brian gave CBS News on April 14th, the day after his release. He told CBS they had been sailing together for 12 years and lived on Soulmate for 4 full years, calling the boat their floating home, describing the partnership in his own voice as being more like co-captains, where he had certain jobs and she had others because the boat was quite large. It took 2 people working together to run the vessel in an efficient way. Hold the description Blaine Stevenson gave of exactly who Brian used to be, a former Marine and union leader who stood up for people in difficult political climates. Now hold the water. 4 feet at low tide, about 10 feet at high tide. Clear enough. A charter captain with 15 years' experience there says you can see stingrays and turtles right from the boat's deck. Land was visible in every direction. This wasn't the open ocean at all. A shallow channel between 2 small islands with other boats moving through it that evening. Now hold the conditions using Brian's own numbers. 20-mile-per-hour winds, 3-foot seas, and the sun just 10 minutes away from setting completely. A return route they had basically covered in some form that morning on their way out. Now, hold that thought. This sentence is only 2 words long. Brian spoke them during his recorded confession, and the narration of this video intentionally walked past them earlier on purpose. 2 words. No life jackets. Neither Brian nor Lynette Hooker wore a life jacket when she vanished into those waves. Two captains with 12 years of experience on the water together. 4 years of living full-time on their boat. A former Marine taking a night dinghy ride in 20-mile-per-hour winds and 3-foot seas. The sun was fading fast in water shallow enough to see the sand. The most basic safety rule every sailor learns on day one was the very first rule broken that night. There is no version of Brian's story that truly explains why neither of them was wearing a life jacket during that ride. This is the one detail that the entire recording simply cannot justify for itself. That is the massive question that, even more than the inconsistencies in the moon story, the phone records, or the anchor sequence, will sit at the center of whatever the U.S. Coast Guard's criminal investigation eventually produces. There is one last part of the recording to address before we finish this video, and it belongs to the man who actually made the recording. On April 14th, when CNN and CBS and other networks ran their full breakdowns of that sailing audio call, Blaine Stevenson framed his choice in very careful, almost protective terms, saying he shared it for the search teams, for the sailing community, and for a friend who no longer had a voice. 3 days later, on April 17th, when the Stevensons spoke to News Nation, things changed. Blaine said Brian needed to man up. He refused to judge the night itself, but criticized everything Brian had done since. Specifically, he condemned every action Brian had taken since that night. Marn Stevenson, Lynette's friend, called Brian's decision to leave the Bahamas for the United States, in her own words, disgusting. These friends, who once defended Brian, were now publicly losing faith in the man whose recording they had released. By April 17th, they were openly doubting the man whose recording they had shared with the world. As for where the case stands today, Wednesday, April 22nd, 18 days since Lynette went into the water, Brian Hooker is back in the United States, having flown to Atlanta on the afternoon of April 15th to be at the bedside of his critically ill mother. According to his legal counsel, he has not been charged with any crime. He denies any wrongdoing. The U.S. Coast Guard's criminal investigation began on April 8th and remains active today. The search in the Bahamas has entered its 3rd week with constant shoreline patrols, sea patrols, aerial drones, and specialized cadaver dogs that the Coast Guard brought in on April 16th. Lynette's daughter, Carly Alicewirth, traveled to the islands with her boyfriend, Steve Hansen, to lead her own search for the truth. Carly told ABC News on April 19th that she doubted Brian's story from the very beginning. In her own words, she said she couldn't grasp how her mother just drowned or floated away like that. The questions kept coming back to Brian. Why didn't he do this? Why didn't he do that? Why did that happen? She has since met with the Coast Guard and Bahamian authorities, while Steve Hansen told ABC News they gave statements and planned to retrace Lynette's final steps. Hansen also shared a quieter detail with ABC News that really resonated with everyone who heard it. He mentioned neither intended to argue that Brian shouldn't have seen his mother before she passed away. Their point was simply that Carly never had that choice. Carly was never given the chance to see her mother before she died. In that single statement made to national media by the man standing beside Lynette's daughter in a foreign land 2 weeks into a search yielding nothing, the heart of this case is exposed. Brian wanted his story told. Stevenson wanted Brian's story out too. It is the exact same recording. The real question is, which man on April 7th truly understood what that audio actually contained? As of now, the investigation remains a haunting puzzle, one where every clue seems to open another door instead of closing one. Witness accounts, fragmented evidence, and unexplained gaps continue to fuel both hope and frustration. Authorities have followed leads across timelines and locations, yet the truth still lingers just out of reach. For those waiting for answers, time has only deepened the silence, not resolved it. And while the case may have faded from headlines, it has never faded from the hearts of those who refuse to stop searching. Because somewhere in the shadows of what's known, the truth is still waiting to be found. If any part of this story touched you, or you have a theory on why two captains left without life jackets that night, comment below. Subscribe and hit the bell so the next update on this investigation reaches you as soon as it breaks. We will see you next time.